Gender-based violence is a profound problem in South Africa which disproportionately affects women. GBV is systemic and is deeply rooted in the country's culture, traditions and institutions. Gender-based violence is a broad term used to capture violence that occurs as a result of normative role expectations associated with each gender, along with power relations associated with each gender in different societies. In other words, there are gender norms which prescribe that men will be authoritative, masculine and violent. On the other hand, women are expected to be subservient and feminine. These norm expectations influence every part of society and are part of the socialization process that begins at birth. The expectations associated with gender differ from society to society and over time. For instance, some societies are more patriarchal than others. South Africa has a strict sense of hierarchy and is dominated by patriarchal norms. In the Nordic countries, however, we see a far greater sense of equality, where it is more likely for women to receive equal recognition and for domestic chores, for instance, to be shared equally. Patriarchal power structures dominate in many institutions in the world, where men are considered the preferred leaders in organizations, churches, families, and academic institutions. Patriarchy is a social and political system that treats men as superior to women and regards men as normative leaders. Inequalities in South Africa contribute to gender-based violence, and this has become particularly visible during COVID-19. During times of economic and social turmoil, it is often the case that men attempt to assert their power over women, and this has resulted in increased incidents of sexual violence and abuse that we have seen in South Africa. To address gender-based violence, we need to reimagine gender roles and norms and actively challenge power relations that reproduce inequalities and ultimately violence in society.
Prevention happens
only when we, collectively
and actively,
uphold human dignity.
It's not my responsibility.
It is ours.
Change only happens when thoughts become actions.
Change only happens when emotion become actions. Change only happens when a decision is implemented.
Change only happens when caring becomes sharing.
Change only happens when silence becomes loud.
Change only happens when lifestyles change.
Knowing is not enough. Our actions mean more. So, what is gender-based violence or violence against women?
Violence that results in
or is likely to result in physical, sexual,
or psychological harm to women,
including threats of such acts,
coercion or arbitrary deprivation of liberty,
whether occurring in public or in private.
There are myths, there are facts, then there is the truth.
Gender-based violence only occurs in the poor families. You know those people who can't.
Myth. Gender-based violence occurs across all types of families. Truth. Gender-based violence starts at the family unit at times. Fact. There are myths, there are facts, then there is truth.
It is not gender-based violence when the victim is not beaten and bleeding.
Myth.
Gender-based violence is a continuum of incidents.
Truth.
GBV can occur in subtle forms.
Fact. There are myths, there are facts, then there is truth.
Gender-based violence must occur amongst people that have a domestic relationship.
Myth. GBV can occur among non-relational people. It is a form of violence affecting women, children, and the elderly in our community. Truth. The Protection from Harassment Act makes provision for other instances of violence not perpetrated in domestic relationships. Fact. There are myths, there are facts, then there is the truth.
Although gender-based violence is mostly perpetrated on women
and all vulnerable groups in societies,
the assumption that male persons are not affected is wrong.
Gender-based violence is perpetrated on all genders and by all genders.
Gender-based violence occurs in all relationships. It even occurs in same-sex relationships.
it knows no color.
it has no preference.
The World Health Organization published that by 2017, 1 in every 3 women globally have been exposed to violence in an intimate relationship.
So, ignore the myths, know and understand the truth and the facts.
Firstly, I am grateful to have lived long enough to look back at my once extremely confusing life. During the years of chaos, I could hardly articulate the essence of my confinement. The situation I was trapped in was too complicated. My head was telling me that something was terribly wrong, while my heart would interpret it otherwise. As far as I could discern it, something had to be wrong with me. Even the attempt to interrogate the discomfort should have emanated from my disloyalty and ungrateful heart. Perhaps that was what marriage relationships were supposed to feel like. Those were refuting thoughts that kept my pain pacified. Deep and intense introspection went on and on over the years, yielding no concrete results, no action. Perhaps if I could only work harder and change my attitude and become a better mother and wife, as my religious convictions also demands of me to be submissive. I was oblivious of the fact that the triggers were external and strategically orchestrated. The more I spent immeasurable energy and time looking on the inside, the more I felt drained and further drowning into confusion and instability. Having been raised in the family where the attitude of gratitude was emphasized, it was really uncalled for to unnecessarily moan and complain when you should be counting your blessings. Besides, in the society I grew up in, marriage was the greatest achievement for a young woman, and if she was fortunate enough to have attained it, she was expected to work hard to preserve it. Obviously, my environment had been an absolutely perfect fertile ground for the denial that informed my experiences and choices. At this point, emotional abuse was clearly a myth.
In relation to myths about gender-based violence, there is a lot that can be discussed. Every individual wants healthy and happy relationships, and society and our upbringing can further sometimes encourage and even pressure us to maintain these healthy relationships. The important question here is, what is a healthy relationship? And is my relationship truly healthy? Or am I under the impression that it is healthy, but it is actually a myth? A relationship is emotionally abusive when there is a consistent pattern of abusive words and bullying behaviors that weigh down a person's self-esteem and undermine their mental health. What's more, mental or emotional abuse, while most common in dating and married relationships, can occur in any relationship, including among friends, family members, and co-workers. In the end, the victim feels trapped. They are often too wounded to endure the relationship any longer, but also too afraid to leave. So the cycle just repeats itself until something is done. If you are having trouble discerning whether or not your relationship is abusive, stop and think about how the interactions with your partner, friend, or family member make you feel. Here are some signs that you may be in an emotionally abusive relationship. have unrealistic expectations, invalidate you, creates chaos, use blackmail, control and isolate you, physical attacks or injuries, threats, and coercion. Keep in mind that even if your partner only does a handful of these things, you are still in an abusive relationship. Do not fall into the trap of telling yourself, it is not that bad. It is expected of me to make this relationship work. This is how all relationships are. This is my fault. And then minimizing their behavior. Remember, everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. The first step in dealing with an abusive relationship is to recognize the abuse. If you are able to identify any aspect of abuse in your relationship, it is important to acknowledge that first and foremost. By being honest about what you are experiencing, you can begin to take control of your life again.
Abuse became a fact to me when I developed a deep-seated anger which could be projected to everyone else but the perpetrator. My children became easy targets because they were vulnerable. I was rebellious at work, and my colleagues found themselves having to tiptoe around me. I got involved in road rages, ready to fight anybody who would get on my wrong side. Anytime and everywhere. I was like a time bomb, ready to explode at any time. As the years passed on, the anger transformed into depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. At that phase, the emotional abuse had escalated from verbal to physical assaults. It is at this point where I started to seek professional help because I realized that there was no other support for me. My family, which were my parents and siblings, felt helpless, and my colleagues were distant because of how I used to treat them out of bitterness and anger. In anxious desperation, I kept my family life a well-guarded secret. I was careful and ashamed, but succeeded to put up the mask and pretended I have a perfect life in the eyes of relatives, society, and even church members. I was very isolated and became more vulnerable. Now, another evil raised its ugly head because I was on a psychiatric treatment. My antidepressant and sleeping medication would knock me down, making me susceptible for matrimonial rape. These tendencies used to make me feel worthless, dirty, helpless, and humiliated. This resulted in withdrawal, and I was now treated like one of the children in the house. Major financial decisions such as buying and selling assets were made without my consent. Actually, I became like a zombie, watching my life pass before me with no say at all because decisions were made on my behalf. During this time, completely hopeless, I would even wean myself off the treatment without the doctor's orders or the doctor's consent, and I would become suicidal. I contemplated either to have an overdose of my medication or throw myself out of a moving car right before the eyes of my then small children while we were on family long distant trips. Emotional abuse became the truth when, after filing for the divorce, could not be awarded my share of assets, which was legally due to me. Emotional abuse became a reality to me when I suffered flashbacks from all horrific experiences that I endured over many years. Emotional abuse became real for me when the perpetrator wouldn't let go of me after the divorce and would invade my personal space, go through right into my bedroom in my rented flat, and also send threats and insults over the phone. Even after I've tried to report him to his church leaders and law authorities. Emotional abuse became actual when my children had to bear my suffering through the manipulation, blackmailing, and even be denied their rights, such as maintenance, with the aim to hurt their mother from a distance. Emotional abuse became valid when I was trying to heal through educating myself and reading various literature and support material about the phenomenon, and it sounded like I was the subject of every self-help book and researched material. Emotional abuse became logical when I listened to talks and presentations about the subject, and it feels like I'm able to complete the presentation because it entailed all my personal experiences. Emotional abuse is real when I talk to other victims or survivors, and they sound like they are telling my own story. Emotional abuse became real to me when I look back in my life, and it becomes so unbelievable that I could have raised my 3 children under such difficult situations. Emotional abuse became the truth for me after being diagnosed with a silent stroke, which resulted to a partial memory loss and speech interruptions.
Remember, when it comes to your mental and physical health, you need to make yourself a priority. Stop worrying about pleasing the person abusing you or pleasing other people by staying in the relationship. Take care of your needs. Do something that will help you think positively and affirm who you are. If you have been in an abusive relationship for any amount of time, you may believe that there is something severely wrong with you, but you are not the problem. Be vigilant of abuse, trust your instincts, and make a decision to improve your mental and physical well-being. Look out for your well-being by looking out for you. You are the narrator of your own story, so take control back of your life by making it a story of survival.
Gender-based violence, commonly known as GBV, is a profound and widespread problem in South Africa, impacting on almost every aspect of life. Gender-based violence, which disproportionately affects women and girls, is systemic and deeply entrenched in institutions, cultures, and traditions in South Africa. Gender-based violence, as a result, continues to be one of the most notable human rights violations within all societies. Our President, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, in his address to the nation, indicated that we are fighting 2 pandemics, COVID-19 and gender-based violence. There are many different forms of gender-based violence. All of these types of violence can be and almost always are gendered in nature because of how gendered power inequalities are entrenched in our society. The World Health Organization divides violence into 3 broad categories according to who the perpetrators and the victims of the violent acts are. These categories are self-directed violence, interpersonal violence, and collective violence. These categories are further subdivided into physical violence, psychological violence, sexual violence, and neglect. Most people know what physical abuse is, but when it comes to emotional abuse, people tend to think there's much more of a gray area. They might know it has something to do with treating your partner badly, name-calling or making them feel insignificant, but not be clear on what actually is classed as emotional abuse, or whether it's really as serious as other types of abuse. So what constitutes emotional abuse? Some of the characteristics include intimidation and threats. This could be things like shouting, acting aggressively, or just generally making one feel scared. This is often done as a way of making a person feel belittled and stopping them from standing up for themselves. Criticism. This is things like name-calling or making lots of unpleasant or sarcastic comments. This can really lower a person's self-esteem and self-confidence. Undermining. This might include things like dismissing your opinion. It can also involve making you doubt your own opinion by acting as if you're being oversensitive if you do complain, disputing your version of events, or by suddenly being really nice to you after being cruel. Being made to feel guilty is another characteristic. This can range from outright emotional blackmail, threats to kill oneself, or lots of emotional outbursts, to sulking all the time or giving you the silent treatment as a way of manipulation. Rejection. Constantly rejecting your thoughts, ideas, and opinions. Gaslighting. Making you doubt your own feelings and thoughts and even sanity by manipulating the truth. Isolation. Limiting your freedom of movement, stopping you from contacting other people such as friends or family. It may also include stopping you from doing the things you normally do, social activities, sports, school, or work. Isolating someone overlaps with social abuse. Financial abuse, controlling or withholding your money, preventing you from working or studying, defrauding you. Financial abuse is another form of domestic violence. Physical violence is often seen as being more serious than emotional abuse, but that simply is not true. The scars of emotional abuse are real and long-lasting, as well as having a negative impact on your self-esteem and confidence. Emotional abuse can leave you feeling depressed, anxious, or even suicidal. The lack of accessible psychiatric facilities in the community burden an already pressurized health system. The lack of appropriate and timely service and police services with regard to reporting and responding to incidents of gender-based violence makes this a human security issue. It is important to take cognizance that laws alone will not eliminate gender-based violence. It requires a collective response on a multi-sectorial platform. Culture is slower to change than formal policy or law, and policy does not automatically create changes in culture. So what can you do if you are a victim of emotional abuse? Emotional abuse, like any other form of cruelty, thrives in the darkness when no one understands, discusses, or recognizes it. Use your newfound knowledge and curiosity to shine the light on the risks and devastation of emotional abuse. It is important for the victim to seek help, be it from a friend, neighbor, or counselor. Stop believing that it is not that bad, because it generally is.
In June 2018, the University of the Free State adopted the Sexual Harassment, Sexual Misconduct, and Sexual Violation Policy in order to establish a safe and enabling environment, free from sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, and sexual violence for all the University of the Free State's community members. The policy was then enabled through the establishment of the Sexual Assault Response Team, better known as SART. The SART is set up to be an enabler of the sexual harassment policy, and its function is to provide support by the SART advocates to all survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. The SART is made up of various interlinked offices, namely Campus Protection Services, the Student Counseling and Development, SCD, Directorate for Student Discipline and Mediation, DSDM, the Dean of Student Affairs, Human Resource HR, and lastly, the South African Police Services, SAPS. The Gender Equality and Anti-Discrimination Office is currently where all incidents of sexual and gender-based violence can be reported. Students and staff are encouraged to contact us on, during weekdays, 051 401 7777, our toll-free number 0800 204 682. The SART online complaint address is sart@ufs.ac.za, which is applicable on all 3 campuses. Report any and all incidents of sexual and gender-based violence. Combating sexual and gender-based violence is a collective effort. Let us put an end to sexual and gender-based violence on our campus.
It is important for us at the OD and Employee Wellness Division that we collectively strive to create a culture at the university that encourages all of us to become actively engaged in the improvement and maintenance of our overall well-being. We are mindful of the fact that wellness is a multidimensional concept and that wellness depends on balancing and enhancing many aspects of our lives. Therefore, we recognize that we all have different needs, and accordingly, we have different approaches to support those diverse needs. But it is important that we work proactively. This means creating awareness and educating ourselves so that we are better able to identify potential challenges and take proactive action. So please don't wait until things get out of hand before you contact us. Let's take hand and walk this road together. Allow us to assist you through our tailored programs created to equip you with the necessary knowledge so that you are better able to identify potential challenges and take proactive actions. Remember, you are not alone.